Yes, I feel like it's time. And like I said, it makes me nervous because I'm not one to have big opinions or make waves, but I do feel like I have to fight for my friends. I have to fight for, a fair wage. And it's not just about the fair wages, it's also about just the education funding for our kids.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Pod This. We've got a great episode for you this week. I know we missed you guys last week. Sorry that we skipped a week without any notice. I was sick. Andy had a crazy schedule, and it was just not something we could get together to make happen last week. We hope you missed us, and we hope you're as excited as we are to be back this week. I'm here in Upper Room Studios, and I've got a special guest with me in the opposite hosting chair today. John, say hello.
Hello.
I've got Mr. John Rorke here with me today.
Friend of the pod.
He's friend of the pod and is guest hosting. He's sitting in for Andy Moore, who could not be with us this week. We'll have Andy back next week. But Joe.
That's it.
Joe has graciously agreed to sit in and be the voice of reason this week.
Absolutely.
To my meandering gibberish.
I was brought in to keep you on track.
And somebody has to. Somebody has to. How are you this week, Joe?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been not a bad week at work. Flu season seems to be winding down a little bit. I should knock on wood. But it's always nice when people aren't crazy sick all the time. So that's been good. It's been busy in other areas, though.
It has. It has been an eventful week and an eventful 2 weeks, which I'm sure we'll catch up on.
Yeah, I mean, trying to keep track of everything that's going on at the Capitol this week is just crazy. I mean, this is deadline week. So as we talked about a couple weeks ago, there is a deadline every year where bills have to be heard in committee and passed out of committee in their chamber of origin. Mm-hmm. And if they don't meet that deadline, bill's dead, can't come back. Mm-hmm. Similarly, there is a date by which a bill has to be passed off the floor in its chamber of origin. And that day, as luck would have it, is today. So as we're recording, this is Thursday, March 14th. The House is still in session,
yes.
Passing bills, doing a lot of work. The Senate was in session until about 11:30 last night, trying to work off the floor. It was so a lot going on.
A lot going on. But then again, there always is.
That's true. So we are going to do our best today to try and bring you guys up to speed. It's been really busy. There've been literally hundreds of bills passed in the last 2 weeks. So we are not going to get to everything, but we're going to try and hit the highlights and give you guys a sense of what's happening at the Capitol and what's in store moving forward. Other big news in the last 2 weeks, I'm sure everyone's aware, is the teacher strike, the impending teacher strike that's going to be accompanied by a strike of Oklahoma public employees. Mm-hmm. We're going to really kind of get into the nitty gritty of that later in the episode. Mm-hmm. So we'll do our usual news recap, let you know what's going on with the legislature, and then spend the bulk of the rest of our time talking about the teacher and public employee work stoppage.
I believe you have some guests.
We do. We got some audio from. We spoke to a teacher. We spoke to some families that have kids in Oklahoma City public schools and tried to kind of get a sense, I don't love the term like man on the street, but it's kind of get a sense of people who are looking at kind of the consequences of this issue in their day-to-day life in a way that, I'm not a teacher. I don't have kids in public school. So it was good, I think, to get a sense of what people that are kind of impacted and invested in that way,
sure,
how they feel about it. So
sure.
We'll hear from them a little bit later.
Great.
Shall we get to it?
I'm ready.
All right. So first segment this week. Don't miss this. This is our weekly news roundup, articles, news articles, podcast episodes, tweets, anything else that we think you should take a look at. We are starting this week in the great state of New York. The New York Times had an article this week. Yesterday, there was a press conference held by Attorney General Mike Hunter and the director of the Department of Corrections here in Oklahoma, announcing that we are going to try to resume executions for prisoners that have been sentenced to death. you may or may not know, we've been on hold since 2015 because there were a series of executions that did not go well. They didn't go as planned.
Did not go according to plan.
Yeah. And since then, the state has really had trouble getting the cocktail of drugs that we use for lethal injections. So executions have been on hold for the last 2.5, 3 years. And the Attorney General came out yesterday and said that, we've been trying to find the drugs. We can't find them. A lot of pharmaceutical companies have basically started refusing to sell these cocktail medications to states, governments that are intending to use them for lethal injections. So the drugs for lethal injection are not as widely available as they used to be. So the state of Oklahoma has decided that we're going to move forward and try to use a method of execution called nitrogen gas asphyxiation. Mm-hmm. This has never been used in people before for execution, so it would be kind of a first. It'd be a first, yeah, definitely. And this was really the subject of this New York Times article. It was kind of looking at how this came about, why we're taking this method, and there's even some legal questions, I think, about whether or not we're going to be allowed to proceed. But that's where we're going to kick the news roundup off.
Kick it off.
All right. Next, regular fixers. You guys will remember that a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the commissioners of the land office and a proposal by Representative Gann from Inola to use funds from the commissioners of the land office to use those as a potential source of money for a teacher pay raise. And I kind of went off on a little rant about why that would seem not to be constitutional according to the Oklahoma Constitution, and also would violate the Federal Enabling Act. At the time, I did make the disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer. I cannot issue legal opinions. However, the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, Mike Hunter, is a lawyer and has now issued an opinion that says that is correct.
And what does it say?
So basically, and we're going to post this up on the web, and the article in question is from News OK, but there's a secondary article from the Tulsa World that actually has the legal opinion. And essentially, what this kind of boils down to is there was land and money that was provided to the state of Oklahoma at the time of statehood, and a condition of that land being given that land and money was that it be used for the benefit of common schools. The state holds that in trust.
Okay.
And part of the rules about how that trust is administered is that the principal of the trust can be increased, but it can never be diminished. And it is in the opinion of the Attorney General, Mike Hunter, that Representative Gann's bill, as written, would ultimately act to diminish the principle of the trust, which would make it unconstitutional both in Oklahoma and a violation of the Enabling Act.
And also a violation of the principle of a trust.
I mean, yeah, it would be a violation of just the whole idea of holding something in trust. I mean, that's a great point.
Right.
So we'll get that up on the web for you. That's really kind of two articles in one. The main article from News OK is kind of outlining the details about what the constitutional questions and legal questions are, and then we'll link to the Tulsa World article as well that has the actual opinion from Attorney General Hunter. Next up is an article from our friends at Read Frontier, the Frontier, independent nonprofit journalism from Tulsa. So the city of Tulsa has recently built a new city jail. And this week there was a change in the city ordinances, or in a city ordinance, that affects how citizens who have kind of low-level criminal offenses. So think things like traffic violations, other misdemeanors, not felonies, not violent crimes, when and how they can be, when and how they can appear in front of the court to rectify these outstanding issues. So I guess in the past, if someone missed their court date or failed to pay a fine or failed to pay a court fee, even if that was weeks or months overdue, they could work with an attorney. They could be added onto the docket at the city court, the municipal court, and they could appear in front of the judge and get put on a payment plan, or they could pay it off, or they could, basically take the steps they need to take to not be arrested for having outstanding warrants and fines.
And it sounds like it'd be a relatively easy process.
Right.
Okay.
So very straightforward, and they've kind of, defense attorneys in Tulsa, they've operated this way for a long time. Well, they changed this ordinance, so now if they're failed to appear or pay a fine goes beyond 60 days, they are now legally required to surrender themselves to the city jail, or a warrant will be put out for their arrest. So defense attorneys are saying, like, what the hell? Like, where did this come from? There was very little kind of notice served that this was going to be a change. And because they have this brand new jail, defense attorneys are kind of crying foul and saying, hey, this is really just a way to get more people into this jail, right? Like, we got this jail, now we need to fill it up, right? We got it, so we got to use it. Again, I am not a lawyer, and I don't practice the law that I don't practice in Tulsa, so I can't offer my firsthand opinion of it. But I'll tell you, I think that the article is really interesting and definitely worth a read.
And how might that impact the Tulsa jail system right now?
I mean, in terms of the city jail, I think that I shouldn't say I think. The case that the defense attorneys are making is that, like, we use all this taxpayer money to build a jail. We should use the jail for something. There's also an argument to be made that the reason they built this jail is because a lot of these kind of low level offenders that were winding up incarcerated were being sent to the Tulsa County Jail, which, like many county jails in Oklahoma, is massively
burdened.
Yeah. So that was the reason, I think, for the construction of the city jail. But I think that some of the district attorney or some of the defense attorneys that practice in Tulsa didn't see this coming.
Okay.
So,
all right. So we're going to put that up on the web.
Yeah,
too.
that'll be up on the web as well. All right. Next up, our friends at NonDoc, another great independent nonprofit investigative journalism site. That this one's based here in Oklahoma City, has an article about the Wind Catcher Project. So the Wind Catcher Project is a power project, a wind turbine. It seems like it's pretty self-explanatory. A wind turbine
There's
project.
An implication there.
Right. It's a wind turbine project that has been proposed for the Panhandle. And it's big. How big? If it is built, it will be the largest wind energy project ever constructed in the United States. Like, it's huge. I think that the goal is like 800 2.5 megawatt turbines that are planned.
Wow.
This is being advocated by Public Service Company of Oklahoma. Interestingly, Walmart is a big proponent of this as well.
Okay.
Walmart has an agreement where they would get a lot of their power from this new project. And Walmart as a company has plans to be, I think, 50% renewable by 2025 and 100% renewable not far after that.
And you're talking about the Walmart brand, the national brand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. However, the Wind Catcher Project is facing a lot of opposition. It's facing opposition from kind of some of the usual suspects. We've talked about before that Mr. Ham from Continental Energy has a lot of animosity toward wind projects. There's some other kind of players in the more traditional energy sector. There are actually some other purveyors of wind energy that are also opposed to this. There was a big hearing at the Corporation Commission earlier this week, kind of talking about the project, merits, demerits, whether it should go forward. It's the article. It's pretty lengthy. It gets into a lot of detail. It is absolutely worth your time to check out.
Any indication of how conservation groups are responding to this news?
When you say conservation, do you mean energy conservation groups? Do you mean like environmental groups?
Conservation.
I don't know that. I mean, have you heard anything? I haven't heard that off the top of my head. Do you know?
I haven't to this specific project, but I have in the past heard about environmental conservation groups opposing wind turbines as they tend to interfere with bird migrations. So
I was just going to say
things like that.
Migratory bird patterns.
Migratory bird patterns. That's it. You got it.
I've never gotten to say that on the pod, but I can check it off my bucket list.
It's another first.
Migratory bird patterns.
John co-hosts first.
Right.
And you get to say, something you've been wanting to say for a long time.
Oh, man, it's a good day.
Wow.
It's a good day.
Let's go for 3.
Oh, well, I'm sure we'll find something. All right. Lastly, our fifth article for the week,
And this is the hot topic.
it is. This is, I try really hard not to prioritize our news roundup. Like, I think anything that we put up, we feel like is worth reading for a lot of reasons. But if you're only going to read one thing this week, this last one is the one that you should check out. So, Oklahoma Watch, investigative journalism, again, nonprofit here in Oklahoma City, has a great piece up that's talking about the teacher strike. The piece really does a couple of things. So, as we have talked about at length previously, and as we'll get into more here in a little bit, several revenue measures have been proposed in the House and the Senate to try and bring in more money to the state treasury for the purposes of funding a lot of things, but particularly a $5,000 teacher pay raise. As yet, none of those have garnered the necessary 75% threshold to pass into law. The most recent plan, Step Up, failed by a pretty significant margin, and Oklahoma Watch contacted all the legislators that voted against the Step Up plan. They heard back from 17 of them, I believe.
Wow.
And this article details the responses that they got from all 17 legislators who responded to that inquiry. And their responses are illuminating. The other reason I would say that article is really worth your time is because the second half is one of the Q&As. I think Oklahoma Watch really does a great job of coming up with, like, here's kind of frequently asked questions for a particular issue. And so the rest of the article deals with some of the facts about a potential teacher, public employee walkout.
Right.
Where can you get childcare? What about kids who depend on schools for lunches? Is this legal? Are teachers allowed to strike? It's good, interesting reading. And I think that this is an issue that's going to affect, virtually everyone who lives in Oklahoma, one way or the other. So if you're going to read one thing this week, I would check that out.
And it's pressing because we're talking about something that is tentatively scheduled for early April.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
We are weeks away.
Yeah, 2 weeks and 4 days.
Wow.
So
Great.
All right, John. Any thoughts? Thoughts on the news roundup? Thoughts on any of these that you found particularly compelling? Or
Well, I do think that the hot topic, whether we are going to acknowledge it or not, is this teacher walkout. And when you consider that state employees are considering planning a stoppage, and we don't know what that entails, and we don't know what the teacher walkout entails. Is this something that's going to last for several days? What's the potential impact of that? It would be extremely informative to know kind of what is the what does that look like, and also what does the stoppage look like for the state employees, because we're talking about something that could have a lot of impact on unintended populations, those individuals seeking those services, or those students that are in school. So
absolutely. All right. Well, that is the news roundup for the week. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a minute for your legislative recap. And we're back. We're going to move on to our legislative recap.
Let's do it.
As we mentioned at the top, there have been, hundreds of bills that have been heard and passed. And even if you follow Capitol, the official Oklahoma House and Oklahoma Senate Twitter accounts, and you get not notifications, but every single bill that comes up shows up in your feed, and then the vote shows up in your feed.
It's still too much. It's still a lot.
Yeah, there's just no possible way to keep up with all of it. So we are going to kind of divide this week's legislative recap into three sections. Basically, win, lose, or draw, right? I want to emphasize here, winners, we are not putting bills in the winning category to signify that I or Joe or Let's Fix This endorses these bills. We're simply saying these bills won because they passed, okay?
And they lost because
they didn't
not
pass, right? So don't take the category win, lose, or draw as a an endorsement or a comment on the merits of the bill from our perspective.
And to be clear, a draw means that we're still waiting for
Yes.
new information.
We're
We're going to see what happens.
House is in session as we speak. Senate may have some work to do tonight, so we're gonna see. So, first up, House Bill 1530. This is a bill sponsored by Representative Jason Dunnington from House District 88. This is an equal pay bill. So
Tell us about it.
So the short story on 1530, this is a bill that Representative Dunnington has been working on for a number of years, and it prohibits it previously in Oklahoma. If you were to inquire about your pay to your supervisor or even your fellow employees, okay, you were not protected from retaliation by your supervisor or your employer. And this bill outlaws that. So this means that, Scott, I can go to my supervisor and ask, what do I make relative to my colleagues? The reason this is important is because, in particular, women are systematically underpaid substantially. It varies from industry to industry, but as a cohort, women are significantly underpaid compared to their male counterparts. And this is a bill that, one, protects women from inquiring about their pay, their compensation relative to their male counterparts, but also kind of reinforces that you're not allowed to do that, right? You can't discriminate in pay based on gender.
A hot topic, not only locally but nationally. So, does it say, is there a provision that allows for folks to go in, regardless of gender, and ask a gender-specific question about pay? To say, hey, I am a male employee here. What do I make relative to my female counterparts? Or is it just a general, I can go and say, what do I make comparative to the other managers here?
I think it's comparative to other employees of your rank and experience.
Okay.
So I think the gender-specific questions would be included in that. But I think it's even more broad than that. So It's just other employees of your kind of rank and experience
and maybe tenure with the company.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So, and where's this bill at, Scott?
So passed out of the House. So was in committee, passed out of committee. It's passed off the floor of the House. It'll now be heard in the Senate. Well, we think it'll be heard in the Senate. That's not a guarantee. Mm-hmm. The Senate author is Senator Stephanie Bice, Republican. So this is a bill that's got broad bipartisan support in both chambers, and I think has a really good chance of passing the Senate and ultimately being signed into law.
Okay. Any word on the street about support?
There was some resistance in the House. The main pockets of resistance are people that saying that this potentially hurts small businesses. The comeback from the supporters of the bill is, hey, discrimination is illegal already. So this bill makes it easier to find out if discrimination is happening. So if that is going to be an impediment to your operations as a business manager, that's a problem that you already have. This bill just makes it easier to point that out.
Interesting. Okay. Great.
Cool. Next up, SB 1086, Senate Bill 1086. This is a bill it's not a bill that we've talked about a ton on the pod.
But an issue we've certainly had conversation about.
Yeah, you want to kind of take the lead and tell everybody what this does?
This is capital gains exemption.
Yeah.
No, lead us on.
All right, so capital gains exemption. This is one that, this is a bill that says for the sale of certain kind of investments, for the money that you get from certain kinds of, whether it's property or stocks, in money that you have made from the sale of investments, you're allowed to deduct and essentially not pay income taxes on in Oklahoma.
Does not count towards your gross household income.
Right. And the reason that matters is because the thought when this bill was passed or when this law went into effect was that this would spur investment in the state of Oklahoma. However, recently, a report by an outside agency found that
And to be clear, why would it have implied that?
Yeah, so the idea is that by saying we're going to not tax the capital gains from investments, that encourages people. So, okay, well, if I can make money and not pay taxes on the money, then I'm gonna try and do that. So I'm gonna take steps to make these investments because the proceeds are tax free. So it's an incentive to invest money rather than sticking it in the bank, right? Rather than putting it in, a savings account or 401k, this is the incentive to buy that rental property or, purchase that stock option or maybe invest in a startup.
As an individual, household, or as a business?
Individual.
Okay.
Individual. Now, that's the thought. Whether that actually has happened in practice, it seems really not to be the case. So part of the never-ending quest to find revenue for the state of Oklahoma has been to look at certain tax exemptions and see, do these make sense? There's a commission that was created explicitly to do that. This commission, they hired an outside agency. This agency conducted an audit. And the short story is this is estimated, this rule, this capital gains exemption, is estimated to have cost Oklahoma about $450 million, something like $120 million annually, while actually only bringing in $9 million, which seems like a pretty shoddy investment.
Interesting.
So there's been a drumbeat for at least the last year.
Is there a projection? Anybody out there talking about how that might change in year 2, 3?
Well, so it's been 5 years, I think, since it's been into effect. And so these are real numbers. The numbers are that it has cost the state $460 something million, 450, and has brought in $9 million. So there's been a drumbeat to get this off the books. It doesn't seem like it's not an incentive that makes sense. And I put this here because it passed the Senate today, which is a big deal. A lot of advocacy groups have been pushing for this to be repealed for a long time. But the other reason that I put it in here was that the debate for this bill in the Senate was striking. The only people who debated in favor of this, right? And so I want to be real clear here. Being in favor of this bill means you want to get rid of this tax break. Every single person who voted in favor of it was Republican. And some Republicans that are pretty conservative. Mm-hmm. And making a really good case from a business and fiscal responsibility standpoint in the Senate that this is not something that makes sense for Oklahoma. Now, myself, that's a stance that I completely agree with, but I feel like that is not an argument that I feel like is made as eloquently as the senators made it today, as often as I would hope. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really it was a little inspiring, honestly, to watch, because to see people from both parties really come together and say, this is not something that makes sense for us.
Maybe this is not working.
Yeah. It was able to pass. It was able to pass the Senate. It's not a revenue raising measure. Mm-hmm. It's not written as a revenue raising measure. So so it didn't require a supermajority to pass.
Right.
Which is good. It is important to remember that this is estimated to cost the state $120 million annually. But this is not a tax, right? This is not you can't point to this does not provide for the bringing in of new revenue. This basically means that we would expect next year the tax collections coming into the state would be higher because this law isn't on the books. But it doesn't create create a new source of revenue, if that makes sense. Right. So that was SB 1086. We'll kind of run through these next couple. There was a bill that passed the House today, House Joint Resolution 1050. This is an interesting bill. Again, it kind of
we're back to revenue raising thresholds here.
Right. Scott Inman, who was formerly the Democratic leader, the minority leader in the House, he debated against this bill today. And so did Representative John Bennett from Sallisaw.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Interesting pair.
It's so interesting that Representative Inman made the comment on the floor, on the record, as part of his debate. It's not often that you see John Bennett and I debating in favor of the same bill. When I found out that was going to happen, I had to reread the bill real quick to make sure that it does what I think it does.
Wow!
I thought that was entertaining.
So give the listeners at home a quick rundown and say why that might be ironic.
It's ironic because Representative Inman is one of the most liberal members of the House of Representatives on many issues, and former Democratic leader Representative Bennett from Sallisaw is arguably the most conservative member. Again, on fiscal issues, particularly.
And why did they come together to?
That is an interesting question. So, House Joint Resolution 1050, this would put a vote, it would put a measure on the ballot in November that would amend State Question 640. As our listeners are no doubt familiar, State Question 640 is the provision in the Oklahoma Constitution that requires a 75% supermajority in both houses of the legislature to raise any kind of tax. This bill would lower that threshold from 75% to 2/3.
3/4 to 2/3.
Right. So you had some interesting coalitions. Really, I think the most interesting coalition is the coalition that formed against the bill, which is a section of really conservative Republicans who said, basically, hell no, we shouldn't make it easier to raise taxes. Raising taxes should be as hard as possible. But you also had
a fiscally responsible, conservative point of view.
Right. But then you also had some of the Dems, that are kind of fairly progressive, and they had two arguments. Well, I shouldn't say that. They had one argument. Their argument is this bill would make it easier to raise what in their mind is the wrong kind of tax. So one of the points of opposition that many of the Democrats have had to some of the revenue-raising measures that have been proposed is that they feel the taxes are too regressive. So they disproportionately affect the poor. And they have blocked many of these revenue-raising measures, or they've been part of the group. I'm not trying to say the Dems have, I'm not trying to say the Democrats are at fault for not having new revenue, but certainly many Democrats have been part of the group that has voted against some of the revenue-raising measures. And they have done that because they feel like they're too regressive, and they tax poor people much more than they tax people that are at the wealthier end of the spectrum. And so they don't want to see the threshold for revenue measures be lowered so that the majority could pass what they see as really regressive taxes with no check.
So you essentially have members of a very minority party and members of a very majority party coming together to say we should not lower the threshold that it would take to pass certain legislation.
Yeah, both arguing in favor of keeping the supermajority, which I found just interesting. Next up is a bill. This is Senate Bill 1140. Senate Bill 1140 is a bill that deals with adoption. So this was
an issue near and dear to your heart.
It is. This is an issue that affects me kind of peripherally because my wife works for an agency that takes care of kids that are in DHS custody. DHS custody. Senate Bill 1140 was proposed because there are some agencies in Oklahoma that take care of kids in state custody and work to find them foster homes and adoptive homes. However, these agencies in particular are faith-based, and they want to be able to adhere to their kind of statements of faith and what they believe about the Bible most of the time when they're determining where to place children.
And we have some very big players in the faith-based community helping to drive this.
Right. And so basically what this bill says is that if I'm a child placing agency, I can accept kids from DHS custody that are in DHS custody into my agency. I can accept DHS funds to help take care of them. But if I want to deny a family the privilege of adopting one of those kids because this family doesn't adhere to what my statement of faith says should be their lifestyle, I can say no. We're not going to adopt that family.
And this is a piece of legislation that looks very much like pieces of legislation that have been passed in other states.
Yeah, that's correct.
So states like Alabama, South Dakota, Texas, and some that are pending in Georgia and Kansas, and even a bill that looks similar in the U.S. Congress.
Right. And, there's two kind of sides to this. So the people that are pushing this bill, which are the faith-based nonprofits that are involved in child placement, their argument is, hey, there are lots of agencies that want to help take care of DHS kids, but they're not doing it right now because they are afraid that, and we're just going to come out and say it, the first time they refuse to adopt a child into a gay or lesbian family, they're going to be hit with a lawsuit. That's their...
So this bill is being packaged as a preventative measure to protect agencies that are faith-based from ever having to field a lawsuit for selective adoption.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's exactly it. And
have there been any lawsuits in the state of Oklahoma thus far?
No, it's never happened. It's never happened in Oklahoma.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's not a lawsuit that's never happened. But the argument from the people pushing the bill is if you put this legal protection in place, you will have many agencies that are kind of sitting on the sidelines step into the arena and try to help start adopting these kids out to families. So that's the argument in favor of the bill. But the argument against the bill is that this is allowing taxpayer dollars to go to agencies that are practicing religious discrimination. And the argument from several of the people opposing the bill on the floor of the Senate was that, we've never had a lawsuit over this issue, but as soon as we pass this bill, we're going to. And that has been the case in some other states, that laws like this get passed and then are immediately challenged in the courts. None of those have gone to the level of the Supreme Court as yet, and so I don't know what the outcome of that would be. But
interesting.
Anyway, the bill passed off the floor of the Senate on Monday.
And to be clear, the state of Oklahoma and a lot of other nonprofit agencies that are involved in adopting out do not discriminate based on those things.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Next up is Senate Bill 1195. Joe, take us away.
Yeah. So this is a bill that is being spearheaded to allow additional types of gaming in casinos in the state of Oklahoma, particularly on tribal lands. So there are a number of casinos in Oklahoma that are operating entirely on what are card-based games. And the idea is that if you introduce roulette and dice type of games in those places, that you can increase the amount of revenue that will come in to the state. Basically, there is an opinion that if you are a casino operator in the state, that you are losing business to other states by not operating the full kind of gamut of gaming styles. Now, I'm not a gambler, so I have not spent significant time inside of casinos as a participant, but I do understand from what's out there that this could conservatively bring in year two, $49 million in revenue to the state.
I mean, that's substantial.
It's significant.
You can't sneeze at
right.
$50 million, right?
Right.
And I mean, I don't have data to support this. And I would also say I'm not a gambler. I play poker occasionally.
We might have made a side bet, you and I, here and there.
True.
And it probably wasn't for money.
Gentleman's bet. Anytime I've been in Vegas, when I go to Vegas, I don't sit at the slots. I don't sit at the card tables. I mean, maybe a hand of blackjack here and there. But if I want to go to Vegas and I want to gamble and have a good time, dude, I personally, I'm at the craps table. So, is this a game that are we gonna have craps in Oklahoma now?
Yes, we could. I mean, so the Senate has voted 30 to 16 on this measure, and what it's been described, it's been given the metaphor of kind of what we have in the past done with alcohol, right? And the way that we do gaming in the state of Oklahoma has been referred to by proprietors of gaming institutions as gambling 3.2, right?
That is hilarious.
It's essentially gambling light, right?
Okay.
And so what the folks that are in support of this bill are looking for is to expand the gaming options for the folks that are already coming to the casinos or who would otherwise be coming to the casinos instead of going all the way to Vegas.
Right.
So yeah, you could see craps, other variants. I'm not informed about what all the dice games are out there, but you would see specifically dice games and roulette.
Is Pai Gow a dice game? No, Pai Gow's a card game, right? Isn't Pai Gow a card game?
Yeah, I actually don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Have you ever played craps?
Yes.
Dude,
Yes, once.
craps was a good time.
Yes, and I also rolled dice on occasion in high school, right? Just in the back of the school. And so I mean, I get it. I think what they're saying is that folks that are serious about their gaming or who are super excited about exploring gaming like to play dice games, roulette, sort of those games that are not the traditional card games. And this bill, 1195, would expand the gaming options at those places. And I do want to say that the other great thing about this bill is potentially the amount of jobs that it could create, right? So right now you have folks working in the casinos at specific games. You add games, you add employees. I think that's what people that are proponents of this bill are really looking at. It's revenue and it's jobs.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, moving on. Senate Bill 1030. This is one we've talked about briefly in the last episode. I'll give a quick summary, and then Joe, I'm going to ask you to make just a little bit of commentary and context here. So 1030. This is a bill that lowers the threshold at which people qualify for Medicaid, which is also called Sooner Care here in Oklahoma. So if we're getting real technical, the bill directs the healthcare authority of Oklahoma to approach the federal government and ask the federal government for a waiver, which would allow us to decrease the threshold at which families in Oklahoma are eligible to qualify for Sooner Care.
That's right. Essentially asking for permission to lower.
Right. And it would take it to 20% of the federal poverty level, which is, I think, like right around, the poverty level depends on your family size and some other things, but this would be a significant decrease from where our Sooner Care threshold sits now.
And you know what it is in terms of income. I mean, what does that decrease mean for numbers of income? So amount of income.
So I think the best number that kind of illustrates it is that a single mom. This number comes from Oklahoma Policy Institute. This is their estimate.
Okay.
That a single mom who has 2 kids who makes $346 a month would no longer qualify for Sooner Care.
Wow.
Yeah. So, Joe, I mean, do you just kind of want to talk for a minute and just like what can you kind of put in context for us about, the argument I think here from this and then another bill we'll get to here in a minute is that there are people that are kind of freeloading. They're taking advantage of the system. They don't need these services. They can afford the health care. They can afford the food stamps. They can afford these things. And they're just depending on the taxpayer to subsidize their lifestyle. I mean, I don't know. What's kind of your... That's the argument that I feel like I hear from the folks that propose these sorts of bills. What would you say to that?
Yeah. What I would say is that that exists. I'm fairly sure of it. I'm sure that there are folks out there that are, for lack of a better way to put it, gaming the system. Okay. What my concern as somebody who works in the nonprofit field and who's doing this pod on behalf of a nonprofit is that we're putting an additional barrier in for individuals that are seeking service. Right. And I think that if you're involved in the nonprofit or public sector out there, that's always a concern for those types of institutions is that, you're already a single mother of 2, depending on, predictors like education, career history, skills, things like that. We're really talking about access. So as a single mother of 2 or, whatever your situation is, do you have access to this service or this benefit or this, taxpayer benefit, right? And is this limiting the number of individuals that can likewise access that? I mean, are we making the pot smaller for folks that are living with a lot of barriers? And are we sticking another one in there? And I think that's the concern that anyone would have just in looking at. I do have to disclose that I am not as familiar with the bill as you are, working in the healthcare industry. So that just coming from a background of working with individuals in the nonprofit sector over employment, this would be a concern for me in terms of, are we putting an additional burden on folks that are already trying to access numerous services to get back on their feet, to get a hand up, not a handout. So that's my concern with it.
So that's the last of the winners. Next on to the losers. And again, winners and losers is not meant to signify an endorsement of any bill or our opinion about any bill. This is simply a reflection of whether or not they passed or did not. First up in our losers section is Senate Bill 1120. This is Senator Yen's medical marijuana bill. Mm-hmm. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. This would be a bill that, should State Question 788 pass in June, this is a bill that would kind of rein it in a little bit. It delineates specific conditions for which medical marijuana can be prescribed. That had passed out of committee with the title stricken. It did not pass off the floor. There was some debate. It wasn't super interesting. It didn't pass. I think that the kind of the gestalt is no one wants to do a lot with medical marijuana until they see how the state question goes.
And so this is a further implication for the types of things that medical marijuana can be prescribed for.
Yeah. So this would limit
more of a specification,
right? So
or a limitation.
All right. Next we have Senate Bill 1104. Now, this is the lunch shaming bill, and we'll talk about exactly what that means. I included this for several reasons. One, I think it's a good bill. Two, it's a good process illustration. And three, this is a bill that I think is near and dear to both you and I. One, because we think it's a good bill, but two, I am good friends with one of the chief advocates for this bill.
You are indeed.
You have also a close relationship with one of the chief advocates for this bill.
That's right. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the Hunger Action Day that was up at the Capitol to kind of talk to our legislators about this bill specifically. And I happen to be married to somebody that is a chief advocate of this and believes deeply in its purpose.
Can you kind of tell us about the bill, like what it does, and then we'll get into what happened?
Yeah, I can. And I just want to point out that this is a bill that has broad bipartisan support, and it didn't show up on our losers list because it was voted down. I mean, this is a bill that just didn't make the cut. And we mentioned earlier in the pod that there are a lot of deadlines, and this is something that just did not make the deadline today. It was bumped from yesterday, and so it's not a dead issue. And we are both, and probably a lot of listeners are behind seeing this issue revisited in the future by this legislature. And what this bill does is it seeks to sort of destigmatize not being able to pay for your lunch as a student in school. And what you see sometimes, and these are localized decisions, is individuals who can't afford to pay the balance of their of their lunch, having to do things to sort of let the rest of the world know that I'm somebody that can't pay for my lunch, right? So you may see that in a variety of different manifestations, right? So you might see a hand stamp. You might have to see kids sign up for it, and that could be in a very open environment in a school. And I think probably the one that strikes me the most is you might have to work it off. You might have to work the balance of your lunch bill off as a student that cannot afford to pay for lunch.
And this is, like I said, it passed out of committee. It had, I think it had bipartisan co-authors, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Right? A.J. Griffin was a sponsor, and so was Mickey Dolenz was signed on.
So bipartisan authorship, bipartisan support. This is just one that really just because of time, today I think the Senate floor agenda today had like 50, 60 bills on it, which is
we're watching it right now.
Yeah, it's still going on. So this is just one that it didn't get heard. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to get heard again. We referenced a bill earlier by Representative Joseph Dunnington, House Bill 1530, the Equal Pay Bill. Representative Dunnington has been working on that bill for 4 years, right?
That's right.
And so sometimes the pace of change, I think, can sometimes be frustrating and glacial, but the fact that lunch shaming isn't getting heard this year doesn't mean that it's not going to. So
that's right, and a lot of advocates still behind it, still bipartisan support, and again, this does not cost the state a dime.
Absolutely.
implement this. So,
All right. And then lastly, we've got two bills that have not yet been heard, but I still think are worthy of discussion.
in the draw.
This is our draw category. And John, you've got Senate Bill 1212. This is a bill that I am not super familiar with. So if you can educate me and the listeners, what's going on with SB 1212?
So SB 1212 is a bill aimed at where you can carry concealed and, on some occasion, unconcealed guns. I feel it's an important topic because there's a lot of national developments and local developments about concealed carry on schools. And let me break this down for a second. SB 1212 would make it unlawful to conceal carry in places owned by the city, town, state, etc., your public entities, your courts, jails, detention centers, etc., again, and public-private elementary schools, public-private sports venues, and where you can gamble legally, essentially. Okay? The one caveat is back to that public-private schools, okay? There is a caveat that says that you can conceal or unconceal carry a weapon in a private school property and or a bus vehicle, some mode of transportation, if the governing body of the private school adopts a policy that says you can. Okay? And furthermore, you can conceal carry in a public school, conceal carry by a designated person. I should note that, right? So whatever that means to that area. If the school board adopts a policy. So I thought that was of interest. I mean, it's a hot topic nationally. It's a hot topic locally. This is a bill that on the surface, until you get into those subsections, looks like areas you cannot carry. It does, however, make an exception for public and private schools under certain circumstances. So I will say that pursuant to all the information that is out there, clearly you have folks that are going to probably come out and oppose this. This is a bill that has not made it out of its second hearing. It was registered as a second hearing today. And you're going to have folks that oppose this bill because it introduces the possibility of either concealed or unconcealed weapons in schools by people who are registered to carry them, for lack of a better way to put it. And then you're going to have folks that are in support of this type of bill because it contributes to school safety. And so that's where the divide is on this Senate bill. It has not, for a lot of reasons, I think there's a lot of issues out there that are really important. It has not gotten a lot of attention. And perhaps it's because if you read through the first couple of areas of the bill, it talks about where you cannot carry. Okay. And then it allows there are some subsections that do allow if the provisions are in place. So if those policies are adopted by either the school or the governing body or the school board.
That's really interesting because Representative Cootie had 3 gun bills in the House that all passed out of committee, and he had one that was very similar to that last subsection. So he had one, it skipped that whole part about all the places that you can't. He had one that was just delineating schools and basically giving the authority to decide who can and can't carry in public schools to local school boards.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. As a state, it takes ownership of your court areas or perhaps your state funded buildings and things like that. But it definitely delineates localized control in terms of the schools. Mm-hmm. So you can see where this is going in terms of its pro and against arguments.
Sure.
And definitely one to watch. So we're going to keep an eye on this bill.
Sure. And then lastly here in the legislative recap is House Bill 3556, Medicaid. This is a bill, again, it's a Sooner Care bill. This is a bill that passed out of committee. As of this recording, has not been heard on the floor of the House. And, I'm kind of hearing that it may not be. We'll see if it is or not.
Is that what the streets are saying?
That's what the streets are saying.
Okay.
This is a bill that would add a work requirements Medicaid. So it basically would take families that benefit from Sooner Care and say that unless you work a certain number of hours per week, then you don't qualify for the benefit.
We have both had sort of overlap with this issue. We have both seen individuals that rely on this healthcare system encounter barriers in one form or another. And again, I go back to what I said earlier, which is that simply, is it a good idea to put another barrier on individuals that are experiencing a fair number of barriers?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So
we're going to keep an eye on this one because it's personally close to us, and we're going to keep an eye on SB 1212 because it is a hot button issue.
But they have until midnight tonight.
Right. Well, we're gonna keep an eye on it right now. We're looking at it right now
as we speak. So, all right, that is our legislative recap. That was a doozy. So, we are going to take a break. When we come back,
very quick break.
Quick break. When we come back, we are going to have some interviews that I was able to get some just time chatting with a teacher in Oklahoma City Public Schools as well as a family in Oklahoma City Public Schools, and kind of get their thoughts on where we're at and why, and what message they want to deliver to legislatures. So with that, we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. If you've been paying attention to current events in Oklahoma for the last several weeks, reading your favorite newspaper, listening to the pod, spending any time on social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc., I'm sure you're aware that teachers in Oklahoma have been threatening to go on strike or walk out of the classroom. This has been a hot topic of conversation, and for a while it looked like maybe it was just kind of theoretical, but now it seems like it's actually something that's becoming more certain by the day. I think the reasons for why teachers would do this have been pretty well explored, both here on the pod and in other places, but just a quick recap. Teachers in Oklahoma have been some of the lowest paid educators, certainly in our region or anywhere in the United States, for several years, if not decades. Teachers in Oklahoma currently are paid worse or lower than educators in any other state. Additionally, education funding in Oklahoma has been dramatically cut over the last 10 to 12 years, to the tune of something like 28%. So all of this adds up to a situation where teachers not only seem to feel that they are not being compensated in a way that they deserve for their level of education and the work that they put in, but even at their job, they don't have the resources that they need. We thought that it would be worthwhile to reach out to some families and even a teacher or two and kind of get their thoughts. How do they feel about a strike? What do they think are the causes? What message would they like to give to the legislature? And what do they see happening moving forward? So that's what we did. I sat down with a family who has children in Oklahoma City Public Schools, as well as one of Oklahoma City Public Schools' teachers, and just spend a few minutes with them getting their thoughts. I hope you enjoy. Can you tell us your name?
Ryan Marshall.
And Jen Marshall.
What district do you guys live in?
We're in OKCPS.
Oklahoma City Public Schools. Have you always lived in Oklahoma City Public Schools, or did you move into the district recently, or how long have you been in Oklahoma City?
We have been in Oklahoma City Public Schools for 8 years now. We moved into Oklahoma City from Edmond, so our kids were in Edmond Public Schools for 2 years, 3 years? Yeah, 3 years. Yep.
Excellent. You've been in OKCPS for 8 years now, and you have how many kids that are in the public school system?
We have two sons, 8th grade and 10th grade.
Very cool. 8th grade and 10th grade. Well, as parents of kids that are in public schools here in Oklahoma City, how do you feel about just the state of education in Oklahoma generally, or Oklahoma City Public Schools more specifically?
It's struggling, and we're sad to see that. I think there are pockets that really shine for Oklahoma City, but as a whole, it's a district that is struggling financially, just like most of the state, and also struggling to retain quality teachers for our schools.
Yeah, and I think, as a state in general, I think the education in Oklahoma has really struggled. Definitely, financially has been a challenge for Oklahoma schools. We just don't have the resources. We don't have the finances to pay teachers what they deserve. My feeling is that we've looked at education as an expense instead of an investment, and I think that's really hurt our state.
Is there anything that you see as kind of the root cause of that? Or maybe another way to ask that question is, what do you see as maybe the potential impediments to improving the state of education in Oklahoma from your standpoint?
Like I said, to me, education, I place a huge value on education for my kids and really just for anybody in general. And to me, it is an investment. I mean, it costs, to send kids to school. It costs to send kids to college, and you save, you try to save and you look at that as an investment and not as an expense. And I think overall as a state, we viewed it as an expense. And so we've been very reluctant to put money into it, to find money whenever times are tough. We don't, we haven't, done the hard things and made the hard decisions to raise revenue, to put that towards education, for an improvement for our state.
So, I'm sure you guys have heard, maybe you haven't, I assume you have, about the possibility of a work stoppage or a strike for teachers that may happen, here in the next several weeks. There's been a lot of talk in the papers about it, referencing the strike that may happen here, what's been going on in West Virginia. I guess, first of all, do you guys have strong feelings about this one way or the other?
I don't have strong feelings about a strike or a walkout. I have strong feelings that teachers do need an increase in pay and that our schools need to be better resourced with the materials that they need, with the resource support staff that they need. I have questions about a strike. Is it a strike? Is it a walkout? Is it one day? How long is it? How does this affect testing for children? And I'm not talking just state testing, but advanced placement testing for kids going into college, or international baccalaureate testing for students at certain schools. I just have a lot of questions that I'm not sure how this is going to impact the state of the schools. I hope it is effective to the legislation and has sheds a huge spotlight on an area that is struggling for sure. But I'm not sure what is the plan. I'm not sure what we're looking at. Are we talking 2 months where kids aren't in school? Are we talking just a day?
Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we have as a state is, the 75% threshold to raise revenue. I think that presents some unique challenges for Oklahoma that would be different for West Virginia or whenever the strike happened in 1990. I think it's, as we have seen over the past year, how difficult it is to raise revenue in Oklahoma. So I think with the strike, I have questions about how long it's going to last. And, honestly, I'm a little cynical about our state, legislators, of whether they will actually do what needs to be done. I have grave concerns about whether they're willing to make tough decisions and, raise revenue and come to some sort of consensus among, both sides to make that happen. I've just seen, with things that have gone on the past year, it's difficult. It's really, really hard in Oklahoma to make that happen with that 75% threshold.
Yeah, and in particular, we consider that 75% was state question 640 that was passed as a response to the last teacher strike. So we'll see what's going to happen. Last question I have for you guys, and you're welcome to share any other parting thoughts that you have, is what message is there anything beyond what you've already said here that you would like to send to the people at 23rd and Lincoln that are, kind of supposed to be, making these decisions for us and kind of fighting these battles on behalf of the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's time to get it done. I mean, I think like I said before, it's an investment in our state, and we are, without raising revenue for education, we are crippling our state. I mean, and to be honest with you, I am encouraging my kids, look outside of Oklahoma. To be honest with you, I mean, that's really sad to say, and it really hurts to say that because I grew up here. I'm from Oklahoma, but the opportunities here are, from what, especially over the past 8 years, we've seen it. We've seen what's happened to education. We feel it. We have felt in our home what's happened to education. We see it every single day. We see the challenges that we face. For example, math teachers. I can't tell you how many math teachers we've been through where we lose math teachers right in the middle of the year. It's been really, really hard on our kids, and so, like I say, I want our legislators to get it done. In order for our state to thrive and survive and be the state that it can be, we need solid education. We have to have education, quality education in this state in order for this state to be what it can be.
I would just ask the legislators to look at the bigger picture. And like Ryan said, it's an investment. We've got to look to the future of the state of Oklahoma. It needs to run on more than just oil and gas. We need to build a broader opportunity base for our kids and show the kids and the teachers and the staff of all of our districts that we actually care, that we value what they do and the time and their own money that they spend to give their lives to these kids. My kids spend more time at school than they do with me during the week. So I want them to have an opportunity to feel valued in a place where all the staff feels valued as well. So I would just ask that they look at the bigger picture.
Thank you guys so much for your time and for all the investments that you've made in your kids and in the public school system. And thanks for letting your voices be with us today.
Thanks, Scott. You bet. Thanks, Scott.
Hey, Leslie, thanks for sitting down and talking with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Leslie, what district do you teach in?
I teach in Oklahoma City Public Schools.
Awesome. And what grade do you teach?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten. That sounds like a fun age. Yes. And how long have you been a teacher?
I have been a teacher for about 12 years total.
12 years total. Have you always taught in Oklahoma City Public Schools, or where else have you taught?
I've taught in inner city Fort Worth and Plano, Texas, and then Oklahoma City Public Schools.
Has the majority of your time in education been in Texas or here in Oklahoma?
Here in Oklahoma.
Awesome. Well, we sure appreciate the job that you do. I think you have a unique perspective, having taught in multiple districts across multiple states. Kind of with that in mind, what do you think about the state of education in Oklahoma generally, but Oklahoma City even more specifically?
I do have to say, whenever I think about education, I really think back to my days in Texas and how I was never worried, or I didn't really feel like unsafe like I do now, in the way that I just, I never know if I'm going to have what I need for my kids. I am very fortunate to work in a school that has high parent involvement, and so they give me a lot of what I need. But as far as even my own child that attends Oklahoma City Public Schools, she's in middle school, and she and her friend have to share a textbook. And so when they're doing homework, they have to FaceTime each other to be able to do their math homework so they can both see the textbook. So I would say where in Texas there wasn't really a worry to have what we needed, definitely here it's more of a worry. So,
wow. What do you see as kind of, thinking about problems like kids sharing textbooks, not, knowing what you're going to not knowing what you're going to need or not knowing if you're going to have what you need. What do you see are kind of the major obstacles to improving education in Oklahoma? What do you feel like are kind of the impediments? Or maybe even another way to put that is, where do you kind of see the problems coming from? What's the root of the issue to you?
One root cause that I think is teacher turnover. And also there are a lot of emergency certifications. And so when you have a teacher going into a classroom, like say for instance, we did not have a reading curriculum for a year. So I've been teaching for a long time. I feel like I've studied kindergarten and I know kindergarten pretty much in and out. So yes, so if I don't have curriculum, I can come up with lessons because I've taught the same lessons for a lot of years and I'm invested in that, and I could do that. But if someone is coming in that is emergency certified, that has never taught, or they're a first year teacher, they can't, since they don't maybe know the standards in such a way in and out, or know how the kids will be able to learn the standards and everything, it's hard for a new teacher to be able to be a new teacher and then also be able to write basically their own curriculum. This year we haven't had a math curriculum, and because of funding again, and so again, teachers are either having to use their own money to buy curriculums off things. There are sites where teachers write curriculums. So we're either having to use our own money to buy curriculums for their students, or basically make up our own lessons, which, those would not be research based. I mean, there's no way that I can make every lesson research based. And so there are going to be a lot of gaps that the kids are going to have because they aren't going to have everything they need as far as every skill they need for that year.
So is it accurate to kind of paraphrase that you see really the lack of funding is the major issue? That's the reason for the lack of curriculum, is because there's no money to buy it. Teacher turnover, is that also lack of funding in terms of, salaries? Emergency certification is because we can't hire teachers that have the appropriate kind of training and qualifications. Is that it's a money issue?
I feel like it's a money issue because that also extends to things like we have a counselor at our school. We have a counselor for a day and a half. So we have many kids, and the statistics in Oklahoma are very high for kids that have experienced trauma or are currently in trauma. So if we have a counselor for a day and a half per week, our kids are basically lined up needing to talk to her. She runs small groups. She comes in and teaches lessons, and we still don't have her enough to be able to really help those kids in the way that they need help. Same way we only have a nurse for a day and a half a week. We have our psychologist for just a day a week. And so we just don't have what we need to really help our kids. And that is a funding issue as well.
Wow. So I'm sure it's been in the news a lot this week, both here locally and nationally. And obviously you're a teacher, so you're probably in the know on these sorts of things. But the big talk has been that the possibility of a strike or a work stoppage for teachers of some sort. What are your thoughts, feelings on that? How do you feel about the possibility of a strike or a work stoppage?
When I first heard the news and people talking about it, really it scared me because I'm not one that likes to make waves, or I'm not a huge activist or anything like that. But then whenever I sit and think about, even we have three sections of kindergarten in our school, and one of the teachers has 3 kids, and she is single, and she roughly brings home about $1,600 a month, and there's no way that she can make it. So she has 2 other jobs, and she also works all summer. And so I just have to put my focus on her, that I'm, this is her, because I'm lucky enough to have my husband is another breadwinner, so I'm lucky that we can make it each month. But I just think of her and how she has to fight every day to make it with her salary. And then the teacher across the hall, she's single and young. She's 24, and she can't move out of her parents' house because she doesn't make enough. She works at Lakeshore every weekend, all weekend, just to save money, so that sometimes she could, at some point, she could save up enough money to get an apartment and be on her own, like she's always dreamed of.
So you're one of your fellow faculty members at your school is a full-time degreed teacher and can't move out on her own, living with her parents. Wow. So all that to say, it sounds like you're in favor of the strike. You feel like it's time. This is what needs to happen. Is that accurate?
Yes, I feel like it's time. And like I said, it makes me nervous because I'm not one to have big opinions or make waves, but I do feel like I have to fight for my friends. I have to fight for, a fair wage. And it's not just about the fair wages. It's also about just the education funding for our kids, that my kids that I love so dearly. Teachers are with their kids longer than some of their parents are during the day. And we fall so in love. I just wish everyone could just understand how much we fall in love with those kids. And just to have what's best for those kids, I just think the time is now.
Well, if you, and maybe that's it. Maybe you just answered my last question. What, if anything, would you say to our legislatures, to the senators and representatives that are at the Capitol every day, who, ultimately, assuming a strike happens, the ball's going to be in their court to either do something about this or not? What message would you have for them? What would you want to say to them if they were here with us now?
I think I would just, I would like to say to them, if there was any way that they could come and just be in our shoes and just see what happens every day and how much teachers really do affect their students' lives, and just really the miracles that happen every day in classrooms all over the city, all over the nation. It's amazing to see just how much a kid grows, and just that relationship that you have, and how much they learn, and how really their lives are shaped by what a teacher can do. And I think if teachers felt more support, and if teachers didn't have to be so worried about getting the supplies, or maybe their own personal lives about being able to make it, we could work together to really just make it a win-win for everyone.
Well, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for all the time and effort that you're already putting into our kids and our future here in Oklahoma.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, we're back. So first off, I want to say thank you so much to Leslie Scrivener from Oklahoma City Public Schools, as well as Ryan and Jen Marshall for their time sitting down with us and giving their thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Kind of on to the subject of a teacher's strike. First, before we kind of get into it, a little bit of
button issue.
Yeah,
we got some breaking news.
We do. We have a little bit of breaking news. So, the Speaker McCall had scheduled a press conference for 3:30 today. Right. Then he scheduled it for 4:30. He actually came out and started talking about the time that we started recording.
Yeah, at the time of this recording, which is right now, like 7 or so.
He literally came out and started talking as we were recording. So I have not reviewed the contents of his press conference in detail, except to say that he came out and basically unveiled what they're calling a 60-by-6 plan. This was Speaker McCall and Representative Rogers, who's been chair of the Education Committee, outlining some thoughts that they have, or a so-called plan on how to get a teacher pay raise passed, and would raise teachers' salaries by a total of $5,400 over 6 years for someone with no experience to $17,675 for someone with 25 years of experience. So this is a plan that they announced that have said over the next 6 years, here is how we want to increase teacher salaries. This is not an across-the-board raise. This is a raise that would alter the salary schedule for Oklahoma teachers, and so the raise that you would get over the next 6 years is contingent on how many years you have been teaching. The OEA, and this was about 45 minutes ago, Oklahoma Education Association has come out with a statement in response to Speaker's press conference. It's short, so I'm just gonna read it. So
take us away.
This is from OEA on Speaker McCall's announced deal on teacher pay, and this is a quote. "The deal announced today by Speaker Charles McCall and his leadership team is not a plan at all. In fact, it's worse than the plan that failed in the Senate last night, and once again, it's nothing more than a political stunt that falls woefully short of the revenue needed to save our schools and keep teachers in Oklahoma classrooms. The group that stood with him today should know that our students deserve better, that our teachers deserve better, and that Oklahomans deserve better. This movement is bigger than any one group who cares more about playing politics than doing what's right by our teachers. In fact, it's these kind of political games that have created the anger and frustration that is driving this movement."
That's interesting. Let's talk real quick about what the manifestations of this movement could be, right? So we're talking about a planned teacher walkout, right? Planned for early April. Last estimate that we read, 25,000 protesters, okay? And possible state employee stoppage of work to coincide with this walkout. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that, one, this shows that, despite some efforts by leadership in the legislature, we are still, at least as of now, we are nowhere near averting a work stoppage. Number one. Number two, I think it's important to note that one of the demands that teachers have put out here, I think that the teachers have been pretty clear in saying that consistently that this is not just about their salaries. I mean, listening to my talk with Leslie, this is not just about her salary or the salary of her colleagues. This is about the fact that they have to buy their own curriculum. This is about the fact that they have to share textbooks. This is about that they, listening to the marshals. This is about that kids don't have the resources in the classroom that they need.
Because teachers may not have access to those resources. Is
Right.
that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly it. And this is not a plan. This 60x6 plan is not a plan that addressed that, right? So and this is getting a little bit into what we try to avoid here. I guess I don't know, punditry, whatever you want to call it, but I think that this is maybe a bit of a misreading of the tea leaves here by the leadership. Teachers are not just advocating for a raise for themselves. They want a raise for public employees. They want a raise for themselves, and they want better classroom support in terms of resources. And this is not a plan that did anything to address that. So in terms of implications, I think that, unless we see something new, I think that in 2 weeks and 4 days, we are still on we're
on track.
To see a work stoppage from teachers and public employees. And the other thing that's important to note is that, again, we didn't watch the press conference, and we just haven't we're doing this. Right.
We can do a special update.
Yeah, we will as needed. But I'm seeing, kind of scrolling here through the tweeter, that apparently they didn't propose any real sort of funding mechanism. There's not a dedicated, the estimates are the 60x6 plan is that this would cost over 6 years. It would cost $700 million, and there's no funding stream. So where is that going to come from?
And again, we have no indication as we sit here on this pod whether this teacher walkout and planned possible state employee stoppage Is that a day? Is that a couple of days? I mean, it could go on. I mean, it could. What are the potential ramifications of that as you see them, sir?
Well, so I think, there's a bunch, and I'm not trying to prioritize them here, but
In no particular order. I mean, what jumps to mind?
So the first thing that comes to mind is one, childcare, right? So there are a lot of families in Oklahoma where mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, or whatever, both parents, whatever that situation is, or certainly single parent families, where all the adults are at work, right? Mm-hmm. And childcare is expensive. Mm-hmm. I don't even have kids, and I can tell you that that childcare is expensive.
I think you and I both worked in fields where we saw firsthand what the cost of childcare, what that burden is, what that barrier is.
Yeah. So that's first off, is like, if you're a single parent or both parents work and you've got kids that are in kindergarten and third grade and your teacher's not there, what are you going to do with the kids all day? Number one. Second, as we've alluded to with the lunch shaming bill, a huge number of children in Oklahoma depend on the school system for food. Okay,
that's right. That's all
there are a bunch of children. I mean, hundreds of thousands of children in Oklahoma where their main meals Monday through Friday are the breakfast and lunch that they get served while they're at school. And so a very real concern is, even if there's childcare available, what are these kids going to eat when they're not at school? So that's
You're talking about 66% of the meals that they're going to have for the week.
Yeah. So that's kind of one and two. Next on the list of things that come to my mind are, you've got high schoolers that are trying to prepare for AP tests, for the ACT, for the SAT. Reinage and Marshall alluded to international baccalaureate tests. It's not that students won't still be able to take those tests, because they can. Those tests are, for the most part, all administered by outside entities, not the public school system, so they can still take the tests. But I mean, if you've ever tried to take like the AP history test or, BC calculus test, the last 2-3 weeks before AP test time, I mean, that's crunch time, right? Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah,
there's a lot of teachers
to take it hungry, tired, any of those things.
And a lot of teachers offer review courses. There's ACT, SAT prep courses that are offered through the school system. And this I think has potentially real implications there as well. Now, when you talk about broader kind of policy implications, Oklahoma, like most states, we get a lot of money from the federal government for education. If we don't meet a certain number of instructional hours, if we don't meet a mandatory minimum number of instructional hours, then we start losing money. We lose matching funds from the feds. And I think everyone would agree that we are not in a situation where we can afford to lose money. Additionally, if
certainly not in a position to leave it on the table. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. And then there's also the state testing. If you miss these testing days, that can jeopardize federal funding as well. So, and those testing days are scheduled for the end of April. So the teachers, or at least some of the teachers' organizations, are saying they're prepared for a 10-day walkout starting April 2nd. 10 days, 10 business days, call that 14. That's April 16th. The implications of this, I think, would be hard to overstate. And, I'm just kind of scrolling through my Twitter feed here, and, I see Representative Rogers has said, and this is who did the press conference with Speaker McCall. He's the former chair of the Education Committee. Representative Rogers has come out and in the press conference said that they came up with this plan without talking to OEA, which is the main teachers union. I'm seeing a Republican senator,
and also the organizer.
Of the walkout.
The walkout.
There is a Republican state senator who is on Twitter saying, and I quote, "Can someone tell me how we're going to pay for this?" Acknowledging that there's no revenue stream for this. So
right. We're seeing that now. Yeah.
This press conference, I think, really just reiterates how far apart we are. And I'll tell you, I've asked some legislators, like, assuming a teacher walkout happens. Yeah, personally, assuming a teacher walkout happens, is this gonna move the legislature? And the response that I have gotten overwhelmingly is absolutely it will. The only question is how long it takes. Which on the one hand, if you're the teachers, sounds encouraging, but on the other hand, every day that this goes on has real consequences.
So here's another question I'd like to ask you, Scott. What could be accomplished between now and the organized scheduled date of the walkout that could rectify this, that could stop the disruption to our state, but also to those that are seeking those services, including the children that are enrolled in those schools? What could happen now that you think would satisfy those parties that are considering this walkout?
So I think that's really, there's really kind of two questions within a question there. So I think what you're asking is what's possible. But what's possible to kind of solve this impasse, and then what's available are really two separate questions.
That's intriguing. Expand on that.
Right. So, and what I mean by what's available is, are there funding streams that the legislature could tap to fund every single demand that the teachers are making? And the answer is unequivocally yes. Oklahoma Policy came out with a great graphic earlier today. And so for fiscal year 2009, that kind of deals with this. For fiscal year 2019, the total funding proposal, everything, if you gave the teachers everything they're asking for in FY 2019, that would cost $812 million. Okay. So now let's say, just for instance, that capital gains exemption that passed the Senate, we've already talked about. Let's say that passes the House and the governor signs it. That's 120. Okay. Let's say that you restore the gross production tax, not to 7%, which is what a lot of the progressives really want, is 7%.
Okay.
Let's say you take it to 5%. And 5% has been the Democratic caucus, particularly in the House. 5% GPT has been their kind of line in the sand. We're not signing on to any revenue proposal that doesn't do that.
So a number that has been debated before.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So let's say you do 5% GPT. That's $200 million. Okay. Let's say that you reverse the income tax cuts. Okay. So you can reverse income tax cuts. That's $300 million. Let's say that you pass the $1.50 per pack cigarette tax. That's $250 million. Let's say you do the 6 cent a gallon motor vehicle tax.
Okay.
That's $170 million. Well,
what's that come out to? For those keeping score at home.
We're almost talking real money. I mean, that all of those things together is right at $1 billion. OK Policy has a couple other proposals on here that I'm not even going to get into, because those aren't things that have been really debated in terms of revenue packages. The main things that we've been talking about are motor fuels, cigarette tax, capital gains deduction. The Dems have wanted income taxes; those never been on the table. And then gross production tax. Where do you set it? But
certainly things that have come to the floor and have been debated, very tangible.
So if you set GPT at 5, you reverse the income tax cuts, you end the capital gains exemption, which happened earlier in the Senate today, you raise the cigarette tax by $1.50, and you raise the motor vehicle tax by 6 cents a gallon, that's $1 billion. Okay? So that's $1 billion, $1 billion minus $812 million, right? So you'd fund everything the teachers are asking for.
You'd have a bit of a surplus.
You'd fund everything they're asking for, and you have $188 million left to play with.
And the majority of that, if not all of it, is recurring revenue,
which is a crucial point.
Right? So that we're not talking about a one-time rainy day fund type of situation here. We're talking about recurring revenue.
Right. The kicker is that every single thing I just mentioned, with the exception of ending the capital gains exemption, requires 75% in both chambers. That means 76. That means 76 votes in the House and 36 votes in the Senate.
Right. Certainly issues that we'll keep an eye on. Thank you, Scott, for that very good analysis.
Hey, man, and you know what? I appreciate you joining us this week. This has been
anytime.
This has been a lot of fun.
I'm a friend of the pod.
We've talked about some stuff. We've had some scotch. We've checked the Twitter. We've talked policy. So, Chip, parting thoughts?
Parting thoughts are, there are significant pieces of legislation that we talked about today that we're going to keep an eye on. Okay. And there are significant pieces of community action that we can't ignore. I mean, we're going to have to see how this teachers walk out, along with, if it comes to fruition, state agency stoppage of work, what does that mean? How does that play out? And how does that impact the people of Oklahoma? So we got a lot to keep an eye on. And I look forward to listening to the pod in the future for an update on that.
You know, and I am really, really glad that you mentioned what the, that community action, people getting engaged. That's what we're all about here at Let's Fix This. Important to remember that 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, it's going to be
upcoming events.
It's going to be our next Capitol Day,
right before the plan, as we know it now, the planned teachers walkout.
Week before the teacher walkout, that'll be our next Capitol Day. We will be in the Blue Room for meet and greet and orientation, and then instructions for kind of what you can do.
If you don't know where it is, make sure that you ask a friendly person there at the Capitol. They'll direct you right to it.
That'll wrap us up for this week, and we will see you guys here back next week. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, you can connect with us on Twitter and Instagram at Let's Fix This OK. Scott is at SC Melson, and Andy is at AndyOKC. You can also like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Let's Fix This OK. Our website is letsfixthisok.org, and there you can sign up for our newsletter, read our blog, find resources, and then details about upcoming events. Our podcast is edited and produced by Scott Melson and Andy Moore, and Let's Pod This is a member of the Mostly Harmless Media Network. Our theme music is provided by the Sugar Free All-Stars. Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization who strives to educate and equip all Oklahomans to engage with their government. We encourage you to get involved in any way you can. Remember, decisions are made by those who show up.